So, where was God during the Holocaust? Let me say up front that 1,000 hours of video teaching and explanation and speculation and discussion will not fully answer that question, nor will thousands of books that have been written and that could still be written. I just want to give a few thoughts. There are some in the Orthodox Jewish community leading up to the Holocaust that felt that there was divine punishment on liberal Jewishness. In other words, that more and more Jews were departing from Orthodoxy, that more and more Jews were not keeping the Sabbath, were not living as Jews, especially in countries like Germany, where it's often said that the Jews there were more German than Jewish. And there are quotes that I've documented where religious Jewish leaders were saying that the terrible things that are coming upon us are the result of divine judgment, even after the Holocaust, even to this day. There are ultra-Orthodox rabbis who say the Holocaust was a divine judgment. Others say, you're telling me that 1.5 million babies and children who were slaughtered by the Nazis were slaughtered by divine judgment? And then all of the very religious Jews that were slaughtered in the midst of the Holocaust, that was also divine judgment. The staggering nature of the evil makes it very difficult simply to say, well, this was divine judgment, that's all. Or even worse, well, Jews don't believe in Jesus. So you're telling me over 1,900 years after the crucifixion that now Jews in Europe are going to be slaughtered by the Nazis, and that's a punishment for not believing in Jesus. Sorry, but that's a bit far-fetched for me. One rabbi told me many years ago, I can't explain the Holocaust without God. He said, but I can't explain it with God either. Others who say, look, the scriptures teach us that God hides himself. Other Jewish thinkers point to what's called hester panim, the hiding of the face. God hides himself, and this is one of those times of divine hiding. Others say, but look, out of the ashes of the Holocaust, we see that the modern state of Israel was birthed, and that is so essential for long-term Jewish survival. And without that, the horrors of the Holocaust, the world would never have even accepted or voted for a modern state of Israel. Again, in a few short minutes, I cannot dare to touch this subject. And as someone who was not a survivor of the Holocaust, as someone who did not lose a mother or father in the Holocaust or something like that, it's somewhat obscene for me to just sit here and make glib comments. So here's what I do want to suggest. This is something very simple. It seems that the satanic hatred against the Jews remains ever real. That when you look at the history of anti-Semitism, you cannot simply say, well, it's divine judgment on the Jewish people or something like that. There's more. Oh, yes, we've been under judgment, chastised, and discipline, but the hatred goes beyond that. First thing I see is this, that Satan wants to wipe out the Jewish people, and Jew hatred is alive and well today after thousands of years on the planet. That's the first thing. The second thing is that God has promised to preserve us. Yes, he said we'd be scattered around the world. Yes, he said we'd be decimated, but he has promised to preserve us. The reason that we are here today is because God preserved us. We may not have answers as to what was happening in the Holocaust, but this much we can see. God has preserved us. And yes, out of the ashes of the Holocaust, the modern state of Israel has been birthed. And I believe this is also important in the overall plan of redemption and in the Jewish people fulfilling their destiny, our destiny. And I say that as a Jew. But there's something else I want you to consider. What if God was right there with his people in the midst of the suffering and pain? Doesn't it say in Isaiah 63, in all their afflictions, he was afflicted? Yes, I've heard miraculous stories of people who were preserved during the Holocaust who should have died, but then what about the family members or friends that died? And yes, I've heard amazing stories of people having visions of Jesus, Yeshua, and coming to faith and being delivered from the Holocaust. But what about those who didn't have the visions? Again, there's no simple answer. But could it be that in the midst of it, God was suffering with his people, not impotent, not unable to do something, but by choice. Could that be? And one last thought. What if the ultimate figure of where God was in the Holocaust is on the cross? In other words, the Son of God taking the sin of the world, the Son of God who is perfect and righteous, being hated and ridiculed and reviled, and dying a criminal's death, exposed to public shame and mockery, and the worst death known to man in those days, and bearing our sins on his shoulders as a Jew. What if he says to Jewish people around the world, I understand. I understand. What if the Messiah says, I, in a unique way, can understand, and if you will look to me in the midst of your pain, your grief, your agony, your loss, you will find healing, you will find life, you will find rest. What if the answer to the question of suffering is right within the suffering itself?